Hello and welcome to a series I wanted to make for a little while. If the title looks somewhat familiar to you, it's probably because it's similar to Illusory Wall's Demon Souls Compare-Through series. Like with that series, I wanted to make a comparison between the classic and fusion versions of Serious Sam the First Encounter, specifically the comparing of environments and asset swaps between versions. I would like to compare things like weapons and enemies, however, I feel like that's best done after collecting all the weapons in Memphis, and maybe after collecting all the Netrixa enemy logs after beating the final boss. But with that being said, let's hop into Hatshepsut's temple and see what we can find. The very first entry I'd like to talk about is the difference in the Netrixa message board, starting with the background. Fusion uses this mist-like pattern, while Classic has a more wavy pattern, kind of like what we see on the walls of the pool room in this level. The mist pattern in Fusion looks randomized, but the illusion quickly fades if you speed up the footage, where you can see it's just two different mist sprays moving counter to each other in a clockwise fashion. In Classic, it just shimmies side to side. Netrixa has also lost her version numbering on the top left of the message board. In Classic, it'll say Netrixa version 2.01, personal version for insert player name. Fusion simply states Netrixa in bold lettering above the message board. The very first screen on the board you're shown in Classic is the Introduction to Netrixa page, which shows an image of Sam with two paragraphs of some very low poly lettering. Though it's hard to see, you can discern some English lettering, just made very low quality to look alien. The first screen in Fusion is the level screen instead of the introduction page. Swapping over, we can see the lettering has swapped to alien, as well as being one very long paragraph instead of two small ones. The level thumbnails are different too. Fusion opts for a more frontal shot of the temple lower to the first terrace. Classic goes a bit higher for a more 3/4 angle. For this next part, I'd like you to both look and listen closely for the differences.
Ready for battle! Ready for battle!
This is one of the few moments where I heavily prefer Classic over Fusion. To start, with the exception of the first flash of light in Fusion, there isn't a single lightning strike or any other variation of it. Fusion is also lacking in the dark clouds that move over the temple. The sound design is also different. Fusion sounds a bit more compressed than Classic. The entire mood is also a lot darker in Classic, and it's a clear downgrade in Fusion. Outside of the obvious higher resolution textures and shine that some surfaces have received, the central relief on the time lock has changed designs. Fusion's design is a symmetrical, almost heart-shaped design, while Classic flips some parts of the relief around to create a more fan-like pattern. The end of each of the time lock's pylons are a clean piece of metal in Fusion, while in Classic there are some hard-to-see Syrian inscriptions. They fixed the sound design while walking on metal in Fusion, so it doesn't sound like you're just walking on stone the whole time. Moving to the east wing of the temple, we can see the pillars by the secret revolver are covered in decals. I tried tracking down this specific decal in an Egyptian compendium, but I couldn't find an exact match. The closest designs I found were of Hathor and Bastet. Fusion simply ups the color grading. The northeastern pillars show a simple decal of an Egyptian man with his hands up. Something you'll see if you look up Egyptian art is that having your hands up in this fashion is almost always seen as a form of worship or reverence. One small difference is that in Fusion the man is facing to the right, however in Classic he's facing towards the left. Other than that, there are no real changes between versions. If you look up at the ceiling, you'll see a Starry Night decal in Fusion, most commonly found in tombs in Egypt. Classic has a simple stone design. In Classic, the underside of these wings can get pretty dark, and it makes for a pretty nice lighting contrast. Fusion adds torches to the walls which light up the Starry Night ceiling. While it does make sense for there to be torches here, I do wish they kept some of that contrast instead of fully lighting up the ceiling. It may be a pet peeve, but I don't like that they removed the crumbling part of the rampart in Fusion. It gave the temple a bit of character. It wasn't anything mind-blowing, but it would have been nice to see. Though I could have sworn there was a version that did have a large crack on the side of the rampart. I can imagine it so vividly, but it's not in any version that I can find. If you can remember it, please leave it in the comment section. All of these elevator doors and secret doors have had their Eye of Ra symbol removed and left blank in Fusion. Kind of a shame. Everything on the west wing is identical, except for this one beheaded rocketeer. He runs in Classic, but simply walks on by in Fusion.
Hi, how are you?
Before we head down to the first terrace, we can take a look at the distant scenery, where you'll notice that Fusion doesn't have any. Classic has these low-quality distant mountains, whereas Fusion simply raises up the hillside at the end of the dunes a little more. The first terrace is actually pretty empty aside from the aforementioned torches, color grading, and missing door symbols. It's a pretty faithful recreation. Moving to the top terrace, we can find the outermost pillars with decals on them facing to the right, except for the rightmost one which faces to the left. I don't know what caused this because it has to be an error. In Classic, each decal faces towards the nearest gateway into the temple instead. On the east side of the temple, the decals are facing away from the gateway here. The Gnar that appears when you grab the double-barrel shotgun seems to have a stutter in Fusion that doesn't show up in Classic. It's always bugged me, but I could never find out what causes it. Fusion seems to be missing a railing or curb that is present in Classic. There's also a distinct lack of fire holders in Classic that do show up in Fusion between most of the pillars. Heading inside the central pyramid, we can see that Fusion heavily decreased the amount of torches present in the first hallway, and despite having more torches, Classic's ceiling is still darker. The hallway with a revolver in it has torches staggered in Fusion but symmetrical in Classic. Heading down the lift section and out the exit doors, the hieroglyph textures are stretched out in Fusion, but they are fine in Classic. Let's go and check out the secret areas real quick. First, we'll look into the Crow Team room. In Fusion, this room is fully lighted with murals, fire holders, Starry Night ceiling, and the Council of the plus 25 armor. Classic has a fully blacked out room with some invisible light assets, no fire holders, and no council. The fan room is basically the same thing. Moving over to the far east wing of the temple, we can come across our first major terrain shift. Fusion simply adds these smaller dunes, while Classic has an entire sandhill that allows you to reach the top of the structure. It also looks like the mountain geometry has changed a bit, so the mountain no longer clips into the far west wing of the temple. Once you release Crow Team in Fusion, they'll just wander off into the desert. However, in Classic you can hear them sing their theme. Outside of the new dune landscape, the Classic has another terrain hike at the end of the canyon. Fusion will try and stop you from getting that far by inflicting heat damage. Something you may not have noticed is that the position of the sun has changed to a more favorable spot, so it isn't quite as in your face when fighting these secret harpies. One of the most immediate downgrades players saw was the lack of reflection textures in Fusion. Originally, the sun and water surface would reflect on the walls, creating this ethereal effect. And while it is a rather small thing to worry about, once you notice it, you really can't unsee it. The far left decal in the pool room has also swapped directions. The first pillar on the right has been spun around, so the nearest decal to us, which used to be the Bastet/Hathor decal, is now of the standard Egyptian. You'll actually find that most of the pillars in these rooms have been rotated to show a different decal, likely deemed too insignificant to change. The ivy has also gained some physics, so it now rustles in the wind instead of just sitting there. The corner pillars in the pool in Classic were used as fire holders, however in Fusion, they're just pillars. Sometimes you'll find these dark spots in Fusion. It's usually due to a simple collision and lighting issue where the game decides that this area should have a light value of 0, even though you put light probes all around it. Moving into the final room, one of the things you may notice is that Fusion gives this room an echo, as where Classic does not. Again, the lighting in the room is quite literally day and night. Speaking of the lighting, one of the big things people talk about is the lack of rays in this room when comparing Fusion to Classic. The rays are here, just heavily toned down. Though I won't lie, the very basic effect in Classic does have its charm. This ceiling lamp does not exist in Fusion, and quite frankly I don't know why it exists in Classic either. It breaks up the lighting in a very on-the-nose manner. Fusion has some extra torches on these exit pillars that aren't in Classic. Now we've gone through most of what we can see by just playing the game regularly, so let's jump into the command prompt and start flying around and see what else we can find. In Fusion, when standing on the roof of the pool or the final room, the interiors disappear until you fall into the room itself. I'm not sure why it does this, but the Fusion editor has this issue sometimes where when viewing certain objects from a certain angle will make the object disappear. In Classic, both rooms are visible, so you're free to go high diving from the roof and not wonder if you're about to smoke your shit on the sidewalk. Moving towards the pyramid, we can see that the Eye of Ra symbol is a little different in Fusion. Classic has the standard single color decal, while Fusion has the more brown and gold design. I believe at this point everybody already knows about this, but I thought I'd add it anyway. Classic still has the secret pit, which is no longer present in Fusion. And that's just about everything above ground, so let's head below. In Classic, underneath the temple, there is a stray piece of geometry. It has collision, and I have absolutely no idea what it's for. In Fusion, if you go underground, you can find the asset room, which is also present but with better lighting in Classic. These guys won't attack you since they're just templates and don't have any hostile parameters. Exclusive to Fusion, however, is the intro sequence right next to the asset room. This is where the intro takes place, and it looks really beautiful. Hold up one second, let me find Decino real quick.
Greetings everyone, and welcome.
And finally for this level, if you ever wanted to know exactly where Sam walks off to in the end, it's quite literally an untextured black wall. And this was everything of interest that I could find in Hatshepsut's temple. If you think I missed something here, please do put it in the comment section. Despite being one of the shorter levels, Sand Canyon has no shortage of changes. The Necropolitan strategy and hint messages are pretty faithfully recreated with the exception of the Temple of Thutmose exit hint, where the original showed off the entire canyon as where Fusion only shows off the exit into the canyon. The entire first room has been remodeled in Fusion. The walls went from standard bricks to hieroglyphs, the ceiling now uses the Starry Night decal, and they've added some torches as well as the support columns. You may notice that throughout this level, the color temperature is drastically different. Where Fusion goes for a more warm atmosphere, Classic goes for a colder palette. Stepping outside, they've added some fire holders here in Fusion. The sun's position has slightly changed between versions. I'd say the biggest shame is the lack of trees in Fusion when compared to Classic. I feel like the trees give the canyon a more desolate vibe as opposed to the more bland version in Fusion. The hillside geometry has also changed to be more jagged and taller in Fusion, and obviously there's no distant scenery again. The temple exit is pretty accurate though. This first hill in Fusion has been given a bit more walkable area, whereas in Classic the rock surfaces come in a lot sharper. You know ball if you understand when I say that the RuneScape community would never have stood for the removal of this tree. The entrance to the Temple of Thutmose has seen a major overhaul, and not a very good one in my opinion. To start, the entire mural has lost all of its color. As a matter of fact, the entire temple has lost all of its color. The top and bottom split of the building is a lot higher in Fusion than it is in Classic. The hieroglyphs have also been massively diminished, and the pharaoh decals are facing to the right instead of towards the door, like in Classic. The decals aren't even the same one. In Fusion it just looks like a regular pharaoh, but in Classic it looks closer to a moon. And the temple's accents, which used to be some sort of floral pattern, have been replaced by hieroglyphs. The secret site compartment has also lost its green accents. At least something that everybody can appreciate is the swap to having an actual walkway up into the secret canyon instead of having to make that weird jump or perform a rocket jump. The canyon itself actually looks a lot better in Fusion, where the dead trees are placed more in the playable area. In addition, they've added some boulders that look like they could be ridden for miles by pioneers approximately 2100 years from now. And aside from some general geometry changes, the secret canyon looks a lot better in Fusion. Heading inside the temple, we can see some more added torches, and the walls are once again hieroglyphs. I know it may seem small, but I'm glad they kept this little step. The fog in the clear ambush room seems to be a lot thicker in Classic, though that may be because Fusion has torches set up whereas Classic does not. Here's one thing I never understood. These are windows, however they don't line up with the level geometry, so they don't go anywhere and no light should be coming in from them. Regardless, I very much enjoy it. It's not often that we get to see the cool blue color grading in Fusion. It's kind of a comforting contrast, and a nice addition since Classic doesn't have any windows. This hallway is a perfect example of what I mean when I say Fusion runs hotter colors and Classic runs colder ones. Personally, I prefer the colder ones as it gives the tomb a bit more of an abandoned vibe, meanwhile Fusion's addition of a bunch of torches reinforces that hotter color palette. The gate in Fusion has had its hitboxes properly modified so you can actually shoot through the railing and ambush the ambushers. Classic treats it as one big piece of impenetrable geometry. You know, I've never done it like this, but the idea is to run backwards from the boulder and let the horizontal beam stop it. The boulder room has had a bit of a makeover. The walls have been changed to hieroglyphs and have some random relief holes. There's also more fire holders, and while most of the statue of Amun is the same, his Ankh staff seems to have undergone a slight redesign. The Marsh Hopper room has had some work done as well. Aside from my previous changes, the altar in Classic is used as a fire holder, where in Fusion it is not. It makes sense why they changed it, since this is originally where you're supposed to find the element you're looking for. The step up to the altar has been given a larger hieroglyph design than in Classic. The entire room in Fusion is also open air. If you look up you can see the sky, but in Classic, despite having the same rafters, it's cut off by a stone ceiling. I won't bore you with the more obvious because once again the aforementioned room makeover remains the same, with one big difference being a slight geometry change to the secret hole. In Classic, it's just a hole with some health in it. In Fusion, there's a small walkway that dips down before reaching the health. This hallway leading outside has some added torches and fire holders. You know, you never really notice how much the trees added to the environment until they're missing. A big addition to Fusion is the added rock piles on the hills. Speaking of hills, this one right here used to not exist. It used to be a regular sand dune that you could walk over. Something new I came across is that the boulders are destructible in Classic, you just need to cheat in a cannon. The speed and trajectory of some of these boulders are also different, specifically the last one. I believe it's meant to crush the clear like it does in Fusion, but it's simply way too slow in Classic. But obviously not slower than that Rocketeer. The element room has seen a pretty big change. It used to be completely dark with some light assets to lead you to the altar. In Fusion, it has a bunch of fire holders and a fully designed room with hieroglyphs and an exit door. Behind said exit door though is the rest of the hieroglyph wall. Since there's not too much to look at above ground anymore, let's head below again. No random geometry this time, though you will find some trigger pop-ins on occasion. These walls indicate that a trigger has been activated once they're crossed. The blue one is likely what activated the pushing wall in this room. The asset room is back again, and the element is present in Fusion as an actual pickup, but not in Classic. Correct me if I'm wrong, but at no point do you pick up an element like a standard pickup, it's just done through cutscenes. If you're ever wondering where the enemy spawners are in Fusion, the way that the editor works spawners the easiest is by spawning them with a select amount of pre-made formations around the spawner itself, so you won't find any of them out here. They're actually out in the actual map, just invisible. And lastly, let's take a look at the boulder platforms. The boulders don't just spawn in, they're set up to shoot out once the player goes near. The ones outside are set up on some plateaus, while the one inside just hangs from the ceiling. No big changes between versions. And that's Sand Canyon. You may have noticed that I did skim over some things, and that's because there's no point in repeating myself a million times saying that the walls have changed to hieroglyphs or going through each room and being super thorough about how many torches are in the room. On to the next map. Next on the list is the Tomb of Ramses III. The positioning of the strategy image has been slightly altered. Fusion now also includes this juvenile arachnoid and rocketeer. The first thing I noticed was the difference in color temperature. Once again, Fusion goes for the warmer colors and Classic goes with the colder ones. And again, I have to give the edge to Classic when it comes to which one looks better. The statues of a moon right next to the tomb's entrance are uninverted in Fusion, while in Classic the Ankh staves are directed towards each other. You'll see this multiple times in Fusion where decals or even statues that are meant to be inverted have just been placed regularly. And it's not even difficult to do, all you gotta do is go to the model stretch properties and put a negative before the Y value. The decals on this pillar all face clockwise in Fusion with the exception of the southern facing one, while in Classic they all face counterclockwise. It might be the lighting's effect on the model, but the entrance door in Classic has a bit more of a green hue to it. These fire holders don't show up in Fusion. As a matter of fact, the entire design doesn't. It's completely original, and quite frankly, I've never noticed them myself. The next room has a few noticeable differences. To start with, in Classic, there were no light sources whatsoever. The back of this plateau in Classic used a mummification decal that isn't present at all in Fusion. This chandelier only exists in Classic, one of those few moments where Classic has a light source where Fusion doesn't, even if it is unlit. In the walkway to the next room, we can see a decal of a man carrying the bust of a pharaoh. In Classic, he faces down the hallway, but in Fusion, he faces towards the entrance. Once again, Fusion is lacking a chandelier which hangs off these crossbeams in Classic. The color hue in the secret pathway for some reason is a lot greener in Classic, whereas Fusion sticks to the dark brown colors. The rest of this room is surprisingly accurate to the original. I could add that the fire holders in Fusion have a different model, since the two versions we get in Classic are no longer being used. As a matter of fact, I don't remember seeing them in the Fusion editor files either, so it must have been that they've been discontinued. This fire holder room in Classic has 4 fire holders, whereas Fusion only has 3. Personally, I prefer the effect that 4 of them make because it creates this little angry looking face on the wall. It's very minor but cool nonetheless. Once again, the Pharaoh's bust decals have swapped directions between versions in the ambush room. It also seems that the spawn height for the Nars is a little higher in Classic than in Fusion, because only in Classic do the Nars take a little fall damage when hitting the ground. It was likely unintentional, but the placement of this fire holder allows me to break the intended route towards the secret teleporter by simply jumping on it and reaching for the teleporter. The fire holder isn't present in Classic and forces the player to go the intended route. Something I noticed was that in Fusion, the ceiling supports and staircases have the same patterns, while in Classic, they're both different. I never really noticed this, but in both versions, the rightmost mural here is smaller than the rest. The Fusion version is once again missing a mummification decal, as well as some pillars to the right of the decal of the lady carrying jugs. This little ledge has always interested me, because the only reason for its existence that I can come up with is that it was made specifically for speedrunners. These murals that are halfway sticking out of the ground aren't in Classic, where the entire pillar is blank and fully reaches a horizontal pillar above. You know, I've always wondered what this little section was for. It just sits here for no reason, though it is kinda cozy. These pillars in Fusion aren't attached to anything, but in Classic they're attached to another horizontal support beam. Once again, this room has been recreated surprisingly well. The exit door frame seems to have more of a arrowhead shape in Classic, when in Fusion the bottom straightens out more. Another random thing I found out about the knife is that the silent killing line on the Necropolitan weapon board, while still being a remnant from the alpha, still has some use. When I'm in invisible mode and I shoot an enemy, the entire room will aggro to my position despite being invisible. However, if I were to use the knife, they don't. As long as a group of enemies has the def parameter activated, you could stealth kill them. In the next room's entrance, Fusion seems to have swapped out some of the fire holder designs next to the door. These walls were changed into a hieroglyphic design. and this small altar in Fusion has a fire holder on it, while in Classic it was an open flame. Here's what came as the biggest surprise to me. In both Classic and Fusion, I was aware of one of these pillars being shorter than the others, and didn't quite reach the ceiling in order to let a beheaded firecracker use it as a vantage point. However, every single one of these pillars in the final section of this room does not reach the ceiling. They don't do anything. They're not holding up the ceiling, they're just standing there. Since it's in both versions, I suppose it's intentional, but why? It makes no sense to me. There used to be another mural behind this fire holder, and once again the little step up is missing the mummification decal. Once again, the statues of a moon in Fusion are facing the same direction, where in Classic they face each other. I feel really bad for anybody with OCD watching this. The chamber of pillars in Classic doesn't have a single light source, however in Fusion pillars get 2 torches on a north to south and east to west configuration. This entire platform in Classic uses the same material and decals across the board, while Fusion uses a standard sandstone and then also the Classic stone material with the decal. There's a bit of visual dissonance going on as a result of that. Up above the platform is a small plateau, which looks normal in Fusion, but in Classic it has a very light bluish and green hue to it. There are these diagonal murals in Classic that don't show up in Fusion either. The final ramp up to the next element is riddled with torches in Fusion, but simply has some light assets in Classic. The final room in Classic is once again a massive brick box with the element in the center. Fusion simply adds some fire holders and an exit door. Once again, the exit door is blocked by the rest of the wall. When hopping into Ghost mode, we can find some of the enemy spawners pre-placed under their arena, though they still show up in the asset room. Once again, Fusion has the element, as where Classic does not. There really isn't anything to talk about here, so I'll just send this one off with a large overview of the playable area. You can really see the color difference this way. Very surprisingly, this map, despite its color grading differences, was one of the more faithfully recreated maps. Next up, Valley of the Kings. To begin, the Valley of the Kings strategy data image in Fusion is slightly closer and more centrally aligned to the Chamber of Horus than in Classic. The actual chamber entrance image in Classic is missing the Horus statue, but it does show up in-game, and it does show up for Fusion as well. The Ankh Pillar image has been pulled back a little in Fusion, likely to hide the lack of distant scenery, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I've always wondered which alien makes that sound. It only shows up in Fusion. I think the closest might be a snort or snarl from either a Gnar or that werebull further back in the map. Taking a look at the interior here, the first thing I noticed was that this torch was replaced by a proper fire holder. The walls in Fusion have lost the mural pattern that was presented in Classic. The lighting in Classic is also so much cleaner with the dark corners, meanwhile Fusion lights up the entire room. I don't know why this was changed, but the archway above the tomb exit has no design in Fusion, while Classic has an entire hieroglyphic art piece which incorporates the Wings of Ra sigil in the center. In Classic, this first room has a circular hole in the ceiling revealing the sky, while the entire ceiling in Fusion is closed off. The small murals of Ra in Fusion that face both forwards and backwards are new additions. In Classic, the decals were of the lady carrying the jugs, and they were both faced outward. Once again, the lack of distant scenery really shows. It might just be me, but I really like the trees in Classic. I know they're kind of unrealistically thick, and Fusion goes for a bit more of that realism, but the Classic trees have more character. There are also more of them in Classic. And they also dot the skyline, while Fusion stays kind of blank, though Fusion once again does add those pioneer rocks. The position of the sun has once again been slightly altered. In Fusion, this werebull is meant to have a kamikaze in front of him, except the kamikaze doesn't spawn in unless a certain trigger is hit. In Classic, he's already there, stuck inside the werebull. When I was younger, I used to think that there was a secret up here somewhere. Obviously not, but let's take a look regardless. If you've ever wanted to know the biomech pathing here, they'll walk in a neat single file line towards the tomb entrance before turning back and making a big loop. Most of the temple is faithfully recreated, though the obelisks have had a slight redesign. In Classic, they are completely filled with hieroglyphs, while in Fusion, only the center of each side has them. Excuse me as I slightly inconvenience this Highlander to death. A slow and horrible murder with a highly inconvenient weapon. Most of you should be old enough to remember that video. And that's about everything outside, so let's head into the Chamber of Horus. I was very surprised to see that in this entire room there are only a few noticeable changes. In Classic, the accent around the pillar is blue and the top is blank, while in Fusion it's all been browned out and the top has a more mosaic design. The accents for the ceiling in Fusion are brown hieroglyphics, while Classic uses a simple blue stone. The buttons in each room have a classic Eye of Ra symbol on them, and the roof in Classic is fully textured while Fusion places a black shell around it. You're actually able to grab the Ankh early in Classic due to the way that the game calculates momentum. When you play Classic, you may sometimes notice that when an elevator stops, Sam will slightly be flung into the air at an upwards angle. This same principle goes for all the forms of upward movement, even jumping. So if you push only one of the buttons and run up this ramp and jump at the apex, Sam will receive a small height boost, which is just enough to let him reach the Ankh. The sleeping arachnoid room has seen a few small changes as well. The murals on the walls in Fusion expand on the ones in Classic. The Classic murals show a bunch of Egyptians carrying offerings. In Fusion, the mural is extended by adding a group of women facing in the opposite direction. The roof in Fusion is open while Classic keeps it closed. As expected, Classic has less torches and fire holders than in Fusion. This second small chamber also has an open roof area, whereas Classic does not. When entering the long hallway, the first pillar on your left has swapped textures. In Classic it was of the Jug Lady, while in Fusion it's just some random hieroglyphics. The one right next to it in Classic uses what looks like some form of limestone slab, while Fusion once again uses the hieroglyphics. The rest of the murals in Classic all depict Osiris facing towards the entrance. Fusion retcons it by changing it to Horus, though each side is facing a different direction. Even though this was a correct decision, these chambers are the chambers of Horus after all, not Osiris. Once again, the limestone pillars have been swapped out for a brown hieroglyphic one. In Fusion, these pillars are hieroglyphic ones, while Classic has a grayish blue stone with the Jug Lady decal on it facing inwards. It kind of leaves the Fusion one looking very bare. The room with the graded floor support pillars have once again been swapped from the lady decal to the hieroglyphics, and the wall murals are once again lacking the female component. The platform that the Horus statue stands on has been browned out in Fusion, but has the blue accents in Classic. You know, at this point for this map, let's assume that every lady decal support pillar, unless told otherwise, has been swapped into the hieroglyphic pillar in Fusion. This next room has an opening in Classic, while it is closed off in Fusion. I wanted to take a closer look at this lantern, which isn't in Classic, but it's still a pretty nice design. This next room has had a few changes, the most obvious one being the floor. In Classic, the floor is reflective and has a sliding effect, whereas in Fusion, it's just a standard floor. In Fusion, the roof above Horus is open, while it is closed in Classic. The platforms under and next to Horus have basically swapped materials between versions. In Fusion, the platform under him has browned out hieroglyphic accents, while the side platforms, which hold fire holders, are made of sandstone. In Classic, the lower platform has a standard stone texture, while the side ones, which now hold a different kind of fire holder, have blue hieroglyphic accents. It bugs me to no end, but the Moon Mountains papyrus in Fusion is zoomed in for no reason. And somehow what happens as a result of that is that the unzoomed Classic version simply looks better. Oh, by the way, I found the real-life image depicted here. It depicts Ra on his solar boat. Apparently, according to the mythology, after Ra got too old to rule on Earth, he retired to the sky, bought a yacht, and now he whips that shit around the Earth currents like it's nobody's business. What a G. Actually, not only that, apparently my boy bought 2 yachts and a new headpiece and whips the other way around for when he wants to be Afu Ra. Same guy, different drip. Crazy. By the way, if there are any Egyptologists, please translate what this paper says. I'm sure it's just bullshit, but it'd be really funny if it's the solar boat's insurance card or proof of ownership. Let's check out the Wall of Darkness. In Fusion, these sides depict the lady decal, while Classic uses the Ra mural. Again, the button has the Eye of Ra symbol in Classic and not in Fusion. The ceiling in Classic is now completely blacked out, while Fusion lights up some of these chandeliers and shows off some new rafters. I don't know why I never noticed this, but after you enter the trap room, the windows that are opened up earlier close again. I feel like there must have been a reason for that, maybe a line of sight reason if you accidentally left an enemy alive in the other room. Who knows? Kind of turns into an out of sight, out of mind type deal. The button behind the next door which closes it for some reason, in Fusion is blank, but in Classic it has a scarab emblem. Above both the button and the door itself, in Fusion is a winged emblem that doesn't appear in Classic. Let's go check out the pool room. In Classic, the colors have once again reflected the pool aesthetic by giving the room a bluer hue, and it's a very nice contrast when walking towards the little area where you can sneak a peek of the next area. There's a thing I found out that only happens in Classic. In Fusion, the Ankh is placed in an indent that prevents the player from being too quick on the draw and snatching it before disabling the trap. In Classic, however, it's just on a pedestal, and if you're quick enough, you can grab it. However, if you hop back into the pool and on top of where the spike trap fell, you'll die, while in Fusion you don't. I believe this happens because the game only really expects you to be able to reach as far as the water's surface before getting spiked, so after the spikes fall, the instant kill box remains from the water surface all the way to the bottom. In Fusion, it's been properly adjusted so only the spikes will deal damage to the player. Oddly enough, I found out when ghosting into the spikes above, it uses the underwater muffle sound effect. In Fusion, these spikes are also attached to a pillar that guides it down. That isn't in Classic. These pillars depicting the Jug Lady are swapped again in Fusion for more murals of Ra. In Classic, I found these textures, which are the ends of the Eye of Ra sigil that are sticking out of these pillars, though it is just the ends. The Eye of Ra has also been inverted in Fusion, where Classic kept it normal. The platform that this statue stands on is simple sandstone in Fusion while being blue hieroglyphics in Classic. The Marshhopper room swaps all of its Jug Lady decals for the Classic standard hieroglyphic ones all over the room. The Marshhopper spawner pyramid in Fusion is also completely bare, while in Classic it has these scarab emblems on it. On the sides of the room in Classic, the walls are lined with murals of Ra, while the walls remain blank in Fusion. Let's go check out the element room. As is expected, there are a bunch more fire holders in Fusion. In Classic, the walls are lined with more of the lady decals, while Fusion swaps it for more Ra murals. Unlike Classic, Fusion has another opening in its ceiling. Checking out the cave area, we can see that Fusion has an extra piece of terrain down here. The end of level trigger still activates around here, so you'll need to cheat to find your way here. But it's cool to see that there is a deliberate path out from the rapids. If you're ever wondering how tall the bridge snapping trigger is, I've tried getting over it using rope walks and rocket jumps, but no matter what, I still get caught in it. If you've never played Classic, you don't know the horrors of the pendulum. In Fusion, you use a teleporter to get to the other side, whereas Classic, you use the pendulum. Your jump timing needs to be perfect to reach the other side. I did some testing, and apparently the only weapons that don't affect the pendulum are the unexploded grenade from the grenade launcher, for obvious reasons, and then weirdly enough the cannon. For some reason, cannonballs just bounce right off of it. You can also affect the momentum while on the pendulum, but be prepared to be possibly thrown off. Looking at the end zone in Classic, it's a simple hole in the wall that ends up leading to a flat wall further in the cave. In Fusion, there's an entire doorway, but it still leads to the same wall. Looking up in Classic reveals a bunch of jagged stones, but in Fusion it's all smoothed out, and there's even a hole in the ceiling. Now, I won't bore you because all of the details regarding the asset room have been the exact same. There are no changes. Though I will leave it off by showing off this strange HUD glitch, or I don't even know if it's a glitch. But when invisible, the Highlander's health bar won't appear in Classic until harmed, whereas in Fusion it just shows up alongside him. Anyway, up next, Moon Mountains. The Netrixa image is a little bit more zoomed in Fusion than it is in Classic. I don't think I have to explain anymore why. Completely off topic, but out of all the Egyptian gods we've seen or mentioned, Moon Mountains is the domain of one of the biggest ones in the Legend of the Beast DLC. Khnum in Egyptian mythology is the guardian of the source of the Nile. Despite Moon Mountains being said source, there is no symbology to reference this. Though, technically there is a mythological reference in the Moon Mountain scroll which shows Ra on his solar barge, which Khnum helps protect in the mythology, so there is that kind of connection. The very first beheaded in Fusion is standing on the bridge, while in Classic he is way over on the first island. Turning around in Fusion we can see the entrance from which we came, while in Classic it's just a blank cave wall. The bridges in Fusion snap at the center, as where in Classic they seem to mysteriously blow up. In an attempt to add some more environmental design, Fusion adds some grass, trees, and this walkway on every island. Classic has a simple grass texture on each island. This may be a hot take, but due to the foliage that sits on top of the cliff face, it lessens the lack of distant scenery enough to almost make Fusion's version look better. Ever wonder what's down this cavern? A whole bunch of nothing. In both versions, the first and second bridge you cross will snap or blow up regardless of the player's status. However, the third bridge will not blow up if you're in invisible mode. It's only after you disable it that the bridge blows up. In Fusion, this secret super armor has a little stutter before being catapulted, while in Classic it works just fine. Some huge stylistic designs are the complete lack of man-made tunnels. In Fusion, it's just a cave with some torches, while in Classic, it's a deliberate man-made structure made of stone and moss. This health box used to be behind some cavern geometry in Classic, as where in Fusion, it's completely open. It kinda ruins the secret this way, though. The cavern exit pushing wall in Fusion is made out of sandstone, while in Classic, it's made out of mossy bricks, keeping more in line with the hallway aesthetic. I'm gonna have to give this view to Classic. The hills here are low enough to properly appreciate the distant scenery. Fusion slightly breaks up the waterfalls pattern by adding these three outcrops, while Classic keeps a full oval waterfall. The secret cave wall in Fusion is just a blacked out texture, while in Classic it's a fully textured wall. Heading down, this piece of geometry hiding the super health is scalable on both sides in Fusion, while in Classic you can only access it from the intended side. It also hides it better. Once I finish this video, if I have to say fire holder one more time, it'll be too soon. In the final arena, Classic has these wooden guardrails where Fusion has nothing. The secret backstage stone in Classic blends into the wall, while it's a lot more obvious in Fusion. Once again, it kinda ruins the secret with how obvious it is. In Fusion, there is nothing special about this Highlander. In Classic, he's liable to give you a stroke. This seems to be intentional, or at least I think it is, because if you hop into the asset room, you can find two of these guys still trying to give you a stroke. Tell me that shit does not look like the Goku meme. I found this in the Fusion asset room and I was confused about what it was, but after checking it in Classic, I believe it's the backstage teleporter. Though the one in the asset room in Fusion doesn't work, while in Classic it does. The end cave in Fusion has no water reflections, and the cave itself also seems a lot shorter than in Classic. Do not fly to the end of level trigger in Classic. You may get motion sick. And that's everything of interest in Moon Mountains, so let's wrap up this first episode by snagging that last element in Oasis. The strategy image in Fusion is a little closer to the temple when compared to Classic, which also shows off the waterfall. Speaking of the waterfall, in both versions, if we go back into it, you can see that the waterfall cuts off before reaching the end of the cavern. The design behind the waterfall is also a little bit different, mostly color-wise. When inside and looking back out, they've added a little stone hump before we can jump back out in Fusion. In Classic, it's pretty much flat. Taking a few steps back and looking at the entire waterfall shows that in Classic, it's literally just a single model with adjoining hills. Fusion takes the edge on this one with its multi-layered hillside waterfall design. The map hillside material has changed between versions, where in Classic it was made of sand, and in Fusion it's made of stone and greenery. And for the first time in Fusion history, we have visible distant scenery. Well, sort of. Normally you'd barely be able to see this, and once more it's very visible in Classic. Okay, so I am genuinely frustrated at this because in Fusion this entire temple is bare. Like, there's nothing. So instead, let me tell you what Classic does have. Everything that is going to be named is either non-existent in Fusion or has been swapped, though mostly non-existent. Fusion does not have accents, side murals, scarab decals, the Eye of Ra, the entire hieroglyphic mural on the face of the temple, the Wings of Ra, checkered patterns on the floor, multicolored supports, the grenade launcher mosaic, more murals, the lady decals, circular limestone pillars, more scarab decals, another Eye of Ra, another set of Ra wings, dope-ass double-standing Nar, the Eyes of Ra in the Marshhopper room, more scarabs in the Marshhopper room, the Wings of Ra in the Marshhopper room. I think you get the message. Fusion has completely dropped the ball on this level. The entire temple is completely barren, and I can simply not fathom why. If you're ever wondering what the Marshhopper boss pathing looks like, they simply run in a circle in Fusion, though oddly enough in Classic they'll aggro onto you even if you are invisible. I don't need to mention the obvious lighting difference in regards to fire holders again. The element room in Classic uses those limestone pillars, where in Fusion it uses hieroglyphic ones. Once again, Fusion has an exit where Classic does not. In front of the element room there's another Eye of Ra in Classic where there is nothing in Fusion. The element itself is a lot more blue in this cutscene in Classic than in Fusion, but if you check it out in the asset room in Fusion, it glows very brightly blue. There really isn't anything more to see here in this level, so starting with the next episode, we move on to Dunes. I wanted to take a quick second to explain how this series is going to be moving forward. The plan is to do this video where I collected all of the elements. From there we go from Dunes to Alley of the Sphinxes, so basically the Memphis to approaching Thebes section, and then finally Thebes itself. If this video gets enough attention, I will happily do one for the second encounter, and maybe even comparing Serious Sam's first 3 alpha levels to the Legend of the Beast. And obviously I'd do a video comparing all the enemy and weapon models, as well as the Karnak demo, since that's technically part of the lineup. By the way, happy 25th anniversary to Serious Sam. Yesterday I was very pleasantly surprised at all the stuff we got. We got the sketchbook for the first encounter, the Classic games now have a point shop and trading cards, and on the YouTube side, Anon just made an hour-long first encounter trivia video, which was awesome, and Arctic started his second encounter analysis, which if you ever wanted to get balls deep into the specifics of Serious Sam, I highly recommend watching his first encounter analysis. Probably my favorite YouTube analysis right now. But with all that being said, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.